In 2011, a white supremacist couple named David Peterson and Holly Grigsby, they were arrested following a 10-day killing spree in Washington, Oregon, and California. The federal indictment accused them of carjacking, kidnapping, and killing 4 people as part of a campaign to, quote, purify and preserve the white race. In 2010, a man in Texas set his home on fire and then flew his small plane into the IRS building in Austin, Texas, killing himself and an IRS supervisor. In 2009, 3 people, including one linked to the Aryan Nations, broke into a home in Pima County, Arizona, looking to commit a robbery. They reportedly intended to use the proceeds of the robbery to finance their anti-immigrant white supremacist Minuteman militia. They killed a 29-year-old man and his daughter inside the house. She was a 3rd grader. In 2008, a man stormed into the Tennessee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church looking to kill liberals. He said he hated liberals and Democrats and blacks and gay people. He killed 2 people inside the church with a shotgun. In 2009, abortion provider George Tiller was killed in Kansas, also inside his church at the time. He was killed by a man with long-standing ties to the extreme right-wing, including both the Sovereign Citizens Movement and the anti-abortion fringe group Operation Rescue. There were the other sovereign citizens who ambushed and killed 2 police officers in Louisiana as well in 2012. There was also the white supremacist who ambushed and killed 3 police officers in Pittsburgh in 2009. He was a regular at the same anti-Semitic neo-Nazi message board as the man who killed 6 people at the Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin in 2012. And that one is not to be confused with the anti-Semitic neo-Nazi message board frequented instead by the confessed bomber of the Martin Luther King Day parade in Spokane in 2011. And by the suspect arrested this weekend in conjunction with a triple murder in Kansas City. Before he ever sat in the back of that police car and screamed Heil Hitler at the cameras, he was organizing online for years, praising other right-wing terrorists, corresponding with them in jail, trying to inspire other people to follow in their footsteps. At CNN.com today, the CNN website, Peter Bergen said we should do a thought experiment in this country, in which instead of shouting Heil Hitler after he was arrested, that suspect in Kansas City had instead shouted Allahu Akbar. How would we be reacting to it then? Why are right-wing American terrorist attacks treated as the acts of one-off wackos that are a surprise every time and indicative of nothing larger than the individual threat posed by an individual kook, when other forms of terrorism engender not just a bigger reaction from us as a nation, but a more radical and systemic response as well? Joining us now is a man who knows of these things. Michael Leiter is former director of the National Counterterrorism Center, which was established in 2003 as the Terrorist Threat Integration Center as one of the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission. Mr. Leiter, thank you for being here.
Good to be here, Rachel.
So you were at the Counterterrorism Center when this report in 2009 from Homeland Security on right-wing extremism, it was produced and then leaked and then never finally reported. Do you remember what was going on around that report at the time?
I do very well. The fact is that people in the U.S. government and the counterterrorism community really were worried about right-wing extremism. And the report talked about some of those factors. Frankly, the report also used what I would consider really bad, sloppy language and some bad analysis about some other things, like the potential for returning vets to become right-wing extremists. And that raised the ire of many in Congress, especially in the right, saying that the Department of Homeland Security shouldn't be in the business of looking at people like veterans and anyone else for purely political views, and why those weren't terrorists, those were patriotic Americans.
In terms of recognizing the threat from right-wing extremist groups, though, did the backlash to that report, the fact that it was never even released in any other form, should we read that as essentially the government getting shy about identifying this as a real threat because they were worried about that backlash?
There is no doubt that when Congress reacts very, very badly to something the executive branch does, it makes people gun shy. And I don't want to say that people stop looking at right-wing extremism. I think Aryan Nation and other associated groups, a lot of the ones you've mentioned, the intelligence community, Department of Homeland Security, FBI still did focus on them. But there is no doubt in my mind that that sort of reaction to the paper itself absolutely made people a little more risk averse than, frankly, they should have been, given some of the history that we saw.
And the Counterterrorism Center, forgive me if I've got this wrong, but I understood that the National Counterterrorism Center by law focuses only on international terrorism. Is that true?
That's true.
And is that right? Do you think it should be that way?
I think it's probably a mistake. I think it's largely a response to 9/11 and Al-Qaeda and international terrorism. But the fact is that extremism and terrorists and people who turn to violence are all going through a very similar radicalization process. They're motivated by different causes. It could be a skewed Islamic ideology, or it could be right-wing extremism. But almost always, there are people who have gone through some sort of crisis, are looking for a higher meaning, create a sense of us versus them. And in that sense, it's actually really important for organizations like the National Counterterrorism Center and foreign intelligence organizations to at least talk to their domestic counterparts so that expertise of understanding what makes people turn to violence, regardless of the motivation for that violence, is fully understood.
And there is this issue with the Boston bombing, and of course today is the one-year anniversary. It's a very painful anniversary. There is this sort of almost feels like an outlier detail in terms of the way we think of it, that in the older suspect's apartment, there was this stack of right-wing, anti-Semitic, very Aryan Nation-style literature, while at the same time we've seen very well documented, and it's seen as very central to our understanding the case, his Islamic radicalism. Is that sort of mixture of different forms of extremism an unheard of thing?
No, it really isn't. We all know, we think of America as a melting pot, and we used to say in the counterterrorism community, it's a slightly bizarre melting pot of extremist violence as well. You would have people who are associated with Al-Qaeda also sort of living what you might think of as a traditional gangster lifestyle. The two are totally in conflict. Or reading white supremacist literature. So it's not totally unheard of. I think in the case of Tsarnaev, it's pretty clear what motivated the Boston bombing. But what can't be lost, and what you've raised, is there are also other systemic threats. There are other ideologically motivated violent threats in the U.S. that we have to focus on. And sometimes there is crossover, no matter how nonsensical it is. Spotting that is simply another indicator of identifying the people who aren't just extreme in their thoughts, but are actually turning to violence.
Yeah, and to see for me, what is frustrating is to watch the sort of news response and the man on the street response, which is that there's no larger story to tell about all these continued acts of extremism if they come from the American right. But there is a larger story to tell about other forms of extremism. I think it's just a frustrating disconnect for me. But thank you for helping me understand it. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Michael Leiter's the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center. We're lucky to have him here at NBC and MSNBC. All right, we got much more ahead. Stay with us.